and welcome, finally, I know I say that every time, but finally, welcome back to the Video Essay Podcast, a show featuring interviews with leading critics, scholars, filmmakers, and other practitioners of videographic criticism. I'm your host, Will DeGravio, and on today's show, I sit down with the one and only Cydnii Wilde Harris. Now, before we get to our conversation with Cydnii, I quickly want to provide just a short personal update. If you subscribe to my newsletter, Notes on Videographic Criticism, which you can do at thevideoessay.substack.com, you will know that a few weeks ago I teased that I would have some exciting personal news to share. Well, here it is. If you follow me on social media, you may know that almost 3 weeks ago, I started a new job as a media analyst at Media Matters for America. I couldn't be more excited to pitch in and help with the work that they are doing in these just super crazy times, to put it mildly. My work there is, of course, completely independent from any of this podcast stuff or any video essay or film things that I do. But my plan is to continue to produce this podcast and video essays and maybe the occasional written essay if I have the time. But all of these things will, from time to time, have to take a back seat, especially in the immediate future as I continue to settle in and get into the swing of things and get used to waking up early and doing all that stuff and get adjusted to not being in school and academia. That's the one part of this that is sad and a little bittersweet, is that I will have less time to pursue this podcast and all of my other endeavors. Still plan on doing it, but there might be a week where I'm just feeling too tired and the newsletter doesn't go out or the podcast gets delayed a few days. And that's just the way it is. And I know everyone out there is, totally fine with that. But it just feels like something I should definitely mention. Speaking of the newsletter, I really encourage you all, if you listen to this podcast, to please go subscribe to the newsletter. It comes out once a week and is really my way of staying in touch with this audience when I haven't released a new podcast in a while. Each week there is a personal essay by me. There's links to all sorts of information related to video essays. If a academic journal has put out a call for essays, or if a film festival is looking for work, or if someone publishes just a great essay or review of a videographic work, I try to link to it there. It also features a weekly interview with a student video essayist as a way to kind of highlight the work of students really around the world. The vast majority of students I've interviewed are not based in the United States where I'm based. So it's been really cool to see what folks are doing in all different countries and in different academic settings. So please go and subscribe there. I know sometimes on this show, I provide updates on things that are going on, and I will continue to do that, but this newsletter really is the best way to do that, because I'm not always going to be able to mention everything in this little opening monologue. So again, that is thevideoessay.substack.com. I'd also encourage you to follow the podcast on Twitter at videoessaypod, where I'm retweeting stuff as often as I can, things that might be of interest. You can also follow my personal account, which is at Will DeGravio. And you can also like us on Facebook. And definitely also please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Spotify or SoundCloud. Another quick note before we get to our interview with Cydnii. I'm very excited to share that the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist, which I've spent the last many months co-curating with Kevin B. Lee and Cydnii, and I feel like I'm really just the third wheel on that. Kevin and Cydnii have really done just an incredible job curating the playlist, and it's been really a pleasure having a chance to work with them, and I'm really honored that to be a part of it and to also have the list published on the podcast website for folks to share. And it's been a really wonderful experience, and I feel super grateful and humbled to be a part of it. And this Saturday, actually, September 12th, selections from the playlist will be making their festival debut. We'll be screening at the Open City Documentary Festival, which is a London-based festival, but this year will be taking place completely online. And we are screening not only selections from the playlist, but we'll also be engaging in a Q&A with many of the creators. Kevin, Cydnii, and I will be there. And so it's really going to be a fun time. And you can find out all the information that you need on that on our website, thevideoessay.com, and on Twitter, or you can check out the festival website. And another really great thing is that if you're an educator out there and you want members of your class to tune into the event, whether it's as part of a class or for a homework assignment or whatever, there is a bulk educator discount. And that coupon code will also be, again, on our website, thevideoessay.com. videoessay.com. Another thing that I'm pretty excited about is, and it's something that I've shared a lot on social media and the newsletter, but I haven't done so yet on the podcast, is the podcast is also partnering with the Carey Comes Home Festival, which is a festival that is based in Bristol, in the hometown of the one and only Cary Grant, that honors his life and work. And this year, the festival was supposed to take place in New York City to kind of mark the anniversary of when Cary Grant made the trip from the United Kingdom to America for the first time. Of course, that can also not happen this year, but there is a virtual event. And we've partnered with them, with the festival director, Charlotte Crofts, who is fantastic and who I also work with in my capacity as an assistant editor for Screenworks. We're working together on an event called The Journeys of Cary Grant, an audiovisual celebration, where we're asking folks to make video essays, fan vids, or any type of video that reappropriates footage of Cary Grant. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of those videos and we're going to post them on the Carey Come Home's website, on the Video Essay Podcast website. And then some of the best work will be invited to screen at the festival. And we'll also ask some of the creators to participate on a panel with co-chaired by Charlotte and myself. And then what we'll do is we'll take the audio from that panel and it will become its own episode of the podcast. So if you're able and willing to make a video essay about Cary Grant that is structured around the theme of journeys, and that is journeys loosely defined. We have a rolling deadline until Friday, the 16th of October of this year, and we'll begin to post submissions to the website in late September to try and generate some more interest, and hopefully folks will submit video essays there. You can find out all the information that you need about that at thevideoessay.com/Cary Grant. Simple enough to remember, right? And like I said, we're really trying to make this as inclusive as possible. So any video that anyone sends in, we will post it on the website. So please encourage anyone who has even a passing interest in Cary Grant or video essays to have a stab at the contest and give it a try. Final note before we get to our interview with Cydnii. So this interview was recorded over a month ago, at least. I honestly can't remember. And, it's given the start of the new job, and I also just needed to rest after completing my master's thesis and everything else. It's been a little while. So in the interview, we don't talk about the Black Lives Matter video essay playlist. That was kind of intentional because we obviously want to have Kevin in on that conversation. And we also, the playlist was very much in flux at that point. Videos were being added all the time, and we didn't know anything about the festival or what have you. So we purposely didn't talk about the playlist. The two videos that Cydnii selected for us to talk about are on the playlist, but this conversation is separate. We will, of course, have a roundtable at some point with Kevin, and Cydnii will return, and we'll all talk about the playlist together. So just wanted to add that in. The other thing, as you will notice when you listen to this interview, is that we had some audio technical difficulties, with recording and whatnot. So the audio is not that great. For that, I do apologize. Folks are definitely going to be able to listen to it, but I just kind of wanted to throw in that disclaimer and apologize for that. It is funny with coronavirus and everything else, and watching the news and seeing people zoom in or what have you. I feel like my tolerance for, my tolerance for not the best audio quality has definitely gotten a better tolerance for that, let's just say. And also in the course of our audio issues, we also lost the opening minutes of the podcast, maybe the first 7 to 10 minutes or so. So this conversation, you're going to kind of be just kind of dropped into it. So if you're listening to, you're like, weird, they don't exchange pleasantries or do any of that kind of stuff. That is why. And I'll just quickly add before we get to the conversation with Cydnii that I think Cydnii is without question not only one of the best young emerging student, or I guess she's now a former student. She completed her undergraduate studies at Spelman College and a master's at SCAD and is now considering going and getting a PhD. She's not only one of the best emerging young video essayists, but I think just one of the best video essayists working today, period. And I am a huge fan of her work. I did not know Cydnii before this conversation, or really before we started collaborating. We only exchanged messages very briefly. So it was a real thrill for me to try and finally get to meet Cydnii and to be able to ask her some questions that I've just had lingering in the back of my mind. And so even though this interview doesn't have the best audio quality and there's some information missing, Cydnii, I can assure you, this is not the last time that we'll all be talking to Cydnii and hearing from her on the podcast, unless she had a terrible time and doesn't want to come back, which I know that's not the case. But like I said, it was really exciting for me going into this conversation to meet someone who has also been engaging with this work as a student and who, as a budding scholar and someone who myself is interested in pursuing graduate studies in the future, perhaps, really being able to talk with someone about what it's like to be in this phase of our lives, because many of the folks that we've had on who are more in the academic area of video essay are folks who kind of came up through the ranks of academia in the more traditional sense and then pivoted to video essay making, or they were filmmakers first or something like that. So it's really nice to sit down with Cydnii and talk about video essays as someone who's had to make video essays as a student in a classroom assignment and are thinking about how we want video essays to play a part in our future scholarship. So that is what informed a lot of this interview. Without further ado, here is our long-awaited, highly anticipated conversation with the one and only Cydnii Wilde Harris. You and I are kind of have similar career paths in mind, are thinking about going on and doing PhDs, and have, created these video essays mostly in classroom settings. I would just be curious to hear your thoughts on, do you remember when you first, I guess, maybe it was always natural to you, but did you feel any resistance to the idea that video essays could be academic in nature? Like the first time you heard about them or they were assigned to you, like what do you remember thinking like in that moment?
I definitely feel like my creating video essays while at an art school definitely helped me dismiss any preconceived or even like unconscious, bias against the form, just because I was in an art school environment. And when you're surrounded by nothing but incredibly talented students, professors, faculty, literally all creating their art at the same time, it's a truly magical experience. Honestly, I described the first time that I went to SCAD to visit after I'd gotten in and knew I was going. The first time I ever went to the bookstore, it felt like I was Harry Potter and I was walking into I don't read Harry Potter, so I'm going to butcher that reference.
Diagon Alley.
Diagon Alley, thank you. I felt like I was entering this magical world where I would walk into the bookstore and I would finally get my wand. Because I went to Spelman College for undergrad, the illustrious Spelman College, a historically black women's college and liberal arts college here in Atlanta. And I was in the English department there. So I was coming from a very specific academic background, one that was incredibly demanding and rigorous and wonderful and encouraging, in that I'm the student I am today because I started at Spelman and finished at Spelman. But I was really excited about the prospect of going to an art school because I always kind of felt like that's where I belonged, is surrounded by other artists. So yeah, during my time at SCAD, it felt like just by being there, what we were creating was art. Even when I was writing papers and I had friends in other departments from fashion design or film and TV production for that matter, who were boots on the ground making their art or in their studios all day, and I was out here writing papers all day or crafting presentations and also video essays. So it kind of for me helped me to become more comfortable in defining myself as an artist. I feel like we are artists who create videographic work and videographic criticism and bring in the academic and meld that with our artistic abilities. So I think that definitely being in that environment gave some credence to the idea that what we're doing is art in and of itself.
For sure. Have you ever encountered I feel like in doing video essay stuff, I've encountered two sets of people who are resistant to the idea. One is people who are maybe more traditional academics and they're like, oh, those video essays, that's not, that will never be a written paper. And there's other people who are filmmakers who are like, do you know how much we have to be on film sets all day doing all this? You just edit somebody else's labor, which I think is a fair issue to raise. I mean, my response is always just like, okay, a video essay isn't pretending to be either one of those things, so who cares? But is that a resistance that you've ever encountered? How do you negotiate that?
That has come up. I'm trying to think if I have like a specific example from my personal work. If I've ever encountered somebody being like, well, what is this? Oh, you know what? I will say that in having to explain to my family what it is that I've been doing, that's where a lot of these conversations can sometimes come up. Because again, I went to Spelman for undergrad and was an English major. And at the time when I was a teenager, I knew I was told by teachers I had a flair for writing. Still, I understood, like, this is something I can do. So what am I going to do to make money with it? And at one point I was pre-law, which is insane to think about. Literally only in theory, never in practice. Like, it was just a thought I had. And I think back to where that idea came from, and it came from film. It came from me being 12 and watching Legally Blonde and saying, I could do that too. That girl, she's got it. She's got the right idea. But in having to, now explain to my family, when I had to sell my family on the idea of me applying to art school, to be like, hey, I had a couple professors in particular at Spelman who encouraged me to pursue for their course study. Dr. Tarsha Stanley, Dr. Patricia Ventura, Dr. Harper, Dr. Nadler. Man, the entire English department is just fire. But I had so many professors at Spelman who encouraged my work and encouraged me to continue to pursue my education and specifically to apply to SCAD. And I feel like I struggled sometimes to articulate to my family what the work was that I was doing, like what job could I get after getting an MA in cinema studies, because I'm not going, specifically to create movies. I'm not going for film and TV production. I'm going to talk about them so that one day maybe someone will listen to me talk about these movies and how I feel about the representation of women on Game of Thrones. Like I had to kind of sell my parents, or just my family in general, on that idea. And also when cool opportunities like this have come up, I think them being able to hear my work discussed on, a podcast, or see me present at a conference and get to actually hear one of my papers read aloud, that they kind of got a better understanding of what it was exactly that I was doing, and how it was art and academic at the same time, and how they can be both. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I received necessarily like pushback from anyone throughout my academic career, specifically at SCAD, just because of the environment I was in. It's an art school, so I think the idea was always to encourage us to keep pushing our work further, like push the bounds and the limits of what our work could be. And it just so happened that mine was through an academic lens,
Sure. No, I mean, I totally relate to that. Like everything you're saying, I've had like similar conversations, and you're so right that video essay, like, your parents text you like, hey, what have you been up to at school? It's like, oh, here's that Vimeo link. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's one of the things that's so attractive to me about the form, is that just the idea to like meet this like crossover audience of like people who are like scholars or whatever, and also people who just like love movies and like love to learn, really, at the end of the day. Like as Jason Mattel says, there becomes a moment when you catch the bug, the video essay bug, and that's like all you want to do. Like, and I feel like when I caught that, like for a brief period, because I also consider myself a writer as well and like love writing. But for a while I was like, I don't want to write. Like, I just want to like mess around and like video editing. Like that's all I want to do. And so like now we're being forced to like write more if we continue in school. Like, is that something, like, have you had that feeling too, where you're like, I know writing's important, I like writing, I'm a writer, but I wish I was in Premiere right now?
There were many times when I was like, this would just be so much easier maybe if I could just put some clips together and show you what I'm thinking with the visual medium. I completely understand. I felt that way often, but I felt fortunate in that I was often asked to do both, So, and also doing both at the same time for me has always kind of helped to flesh out the ideas that I was working with. So I kind of feel like I probably got bit by the bug in making that first video essay for the World Cinema class on Afro-Brazilian cinema. Because after that, even though I knew like this, I can do better than this was my takeaway from that. It's like, I know I can make something like really cool. And wanting to, get into other types of editing software and learn it and become like proficient at it. I just started using Final Cut Pro for the first time. The first essay I made with it, I think, actually would have been my Pecha Kucha on Lolita. Yeah, after listening to the podcast. It's funny. Like I honestly spent I was in quarantine at my house here in Atlanta and had just been like listening to podcasts and watching things I liked, and then when I started seeing everyone posting their work from the video essay podcast, I got super excited, like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? What's Will doing? This is so cool. So I went back and listened to everything again and then started making my own work, but it like literally listening to the podcast, I hadn't created anything. I had been working on one project that I'm still currently working on, that I started at the end of my time at SCAD, so around like the spring of 2018, that I'm still working on. It's one of those projects that I care deeply about, and I also really want to get it right. And it's also a little heavy, so I work on it for long periods, and then I take weeks or months away from it, and I come back to it when I feel like mentally prepared to deal with the subject matter, right? So because of that, I had kind of stepped away from videographic work, and I still had ideas. I have a chalkboard up in my house on my wall where I write down ideas and start research for different projects. And it wasn't until I started listening to the video essay podcast again that I felt like, oh, I can create this minute-long video essay. I can do that. This is fun. So thank you, by the way, for reinvigorating me in the medium, because seriously, I think I needed that. I also really appreciate the structure of an assignment, apparently. So.
Well, I'm super glad you made it. And like all the credit goes to Jason, Chris, and Katie too for creating that assignment, which, as you say, I think is such a good, like, it's like simple but still like fun. You can make it as creative as you want. So like there's all this flexibility, and it's like getting that muscle memory back for like the editing and making is so good. Without spoiling it for us, what is the project that you're working on, if you don't mind me asking? And you don't need to like tell us the argument if you don't want to or anything, but I'd just be curious to kind of hear, I guess that, but I guess also kind of like, what are you working on right now? And like kind of what is are you actively working on different projects? Like kind of what's your just general workflow like?
So right now, the project that I think for a lot of us, we have, most of us have like multiple plates spinning in the air, and that's where I am too. So the one project that I'm currently working on that I think will be like my next piece that I'll actually finish is another companion piece to a paper I wrote. I wrote a paper at SCAD entitled Whiteness, the Spectre That Haunts a Ghost Story from 2017 by David Lowery. And I'll spoil everything now at work. Hope it gets you excited. No, I, by the way, love that film. Really enjoyed watching that film, but I just happened to notice the idea of whiteness kind of permeating this film and how dialogue was used to communicate ideas about art, about nihilism, about the futility of life, I suppose, through like his casting choices, through which characters we hear speak, which characters dialogue is given subtitles, the depiction of the few people of color who are on screen. I just saw so many things jump out at me of like there's a lot of unsaid whiteness going through this film. Like whiteness might be what actually haunts this movie. So that was the paper, and I loved that paper so much. I loved the writing process of that paper, and I also feel like it, as proud as I am of that paper, I feel like it could also do with a visual friend, you know? where you can actually see the various points that I point out in that paper. So that's one thing that I'm working on currently, that I find to be a fun topic, like somewhat fun. Other than that, I'm really interested right now in this intersection between, and it always have been, but I'm interested in this intersection between racism and capitalism, and how capitalism cannot really exist without racism, and how racism helps to keep capitalism alive. So I wanted to look at different films from Black cinema, but specifically from what are called like the hood classics of the late 80s and early 90s and even like the early 2000s. I wanted to look at some of those films and how issues related to capitalism and racism play out in those films. So the next piece that I'm working on with that is, and I'm in the research stage of that, of reading different scholars who have written about the intersection between racism and capitalism. Right now the plan is to focus on the film Set It Off by F. Gary Gray, and talk about how, like, what exactly is at work with regards to financial inequity and police brutality, and all these different issues that lead to these four Black women deciding to rob a bank. What are all of the structural things in place that lead these women to decide that this is how they're going to get out of the constraints of their situation? So that is a piece that I'm currently working on, that I'm really excited about. And then the last one is the one that I mentioned first, that has taken me the longest, is another companion piece to a paper I wrote, but this paper was my thesis. Very long paper was my thesis. And it came from a lot of conversations that we were having in our classrooms about the film Birth of a Nation, and how, from 1915 by D.W. Griffith, and how it is taught and how it is discussed. And I personally believe that it has to be taught within the context of its racism. And I feel that way not just because I'm a Black girl in these spaces who has to hear lectures about Griffith, the pioneer who created cross-cutting, like, because that's not what I personally see when I have talked about Birth of a Nation in an academic setting. And actually, I guess this is an interesting time to share this story. So really what prompted that, and actually also I think, I'm not sure if Cotton came before or after, but what prompted it was for this class I was taking at SCAD on the history of film, but specifically the history of melodramatic film. Melodramatic classic Hollywood cinema. I absolutely love that course. Thank you so much, Dr. Chad Newsom. But we were watching various films, various melodramatic films, and we would rent out a theater on campus and watch them big, because a lot of us hadn't seen these older epics from classic Hollywood large before in a theater before. And no one was looking forward to watching Birth of a Nation, but it was that time. And I had seen it before, of course. It had come up in my undergraduate study when I was at Spelman, and was familiar with it before then too, but I hadn't seen it big, so let's watch it big. And as I was sitting in that theater watching that 4-hour-long black and white racist film, the news came in on my phone about the verdict of the murder of Jordan Edwards, who I believe was a 16-year-old young Black boy who was shot by a white supremacist at a gas station and murdered because their music was too loud. And I hope I'm not conflating stories of murdered Black people, but I'm pretty sure it was Jordan Edwards' story. And I'm looking at my phone and I'm reading this news, and I'm looking up at the screen and I'm watching a film that didn't create but perfected and disseminated so many of the stereotypes about African Americans, about Black people, that continue to this day, that continue to aid in like our subjugation and oppression. So that was a hard moment for me, and I wasn't really able to separate the two. But moreover, I saw clearly how this art was affecting my daily life, my lived experience as a young Black person. And I think that every time we teach that film, Birth of a Nation, in class, I shouldn't be the only person in that classroom who has those same thoughts. I think that when you think of Birth of a Nation, you need to images immediately to conjure of the lived experience of Black Americans, and how that film is directly tied to so many things that have happened to us since that film came out. So because of that is the central crux of that video essay, is why we need to teach Birth of a Nation within the context of its racism to all of our students. And that has been hard, because part of that video essay process has been, watching painful content, or at the very least triggering content or violent content. So I kind of had to put it away for a while before I could feel comfortable to revisit it. And I feel more comfortable coming back to it now, and I feel like, no time like the present to come back and revisit that topic. But yeah, so that's because of the heaviness of that topic. That's why I also was like, I need to find something else to focus on that isn't so dark, and something else that I'm also interested in, which is why I have so many plates spinning. I think that's part of it. So yeah, to answer your very, your very regular question, I gave you a long drawn out answer.
No, I appreciate that so much. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think if we were just like at a bar or something right now, I would just like keep asking you a million questions about all those projects. And like, cause they all sound so fascinating. I'm so excited to watch them. And like, that last one in particular, like, you said that it was born out of your thesis, or it's going to be, as you say, a visual friend, which I love that term, which I'm going to steal that. So is it going to, do you imagine it being like long form?
Yeah, so that's actually been just a part of the creative process through the creation of that video, because again, I started it so long ago, and initially I wanted to keep it on the shorter end, because I thought that would be the best way to keep people engaged. I was like, no one's going to watch me talk about this movie for an hour, but we now know that that's not the case, that of course there are long form video essays, and I watch many of them. So initially I set out to make something somewhat kind of quick and punchy, like cotton. But now I understand that I don't have to keep myself within that box. So I created that for a class. So it had a deadline and I needed a grade. So I think then it clocked in at like somewhere around like 7 minutes. And at the time my intention was to edit it down and to shorten it. But now it's closer to like 15-20 minutes, and I'm super cool with that. And if it ends up being longer, I'm okay with that too, just because right now it's kind of reading like it's using multiple different styles of video essay within one. So the front half is just historical context of the film and what you need to know about the film to get to my point. And then I cite two different scholars, one Dr. Tasha Stanley and the other whose name escapes me right now. I'm so sorry, sir, but how they both have written and published work about how they teach Birth of a Nation within their classrooms. And Dr. Stanley was talking about teaching Birth of a Nation while she was the head of the English department at Spelman. So she's teaching this film in a film class to a group of mostly black women, of young black women, and knowing that she has to, because of, what the film did, and this is a film history course, but also with the understanding of the trauma that it brings up for so many of her students, by virtue of the fact that many of them, most if not all, are black women while she's at teaching at Spelman. And then the other paper is by a professor at another university, a predominantly white university, or PWI, where he talks about his experience teaching the film, and how there are multiple different ways that you can teach this film. You can choose to focus on one of Griffith's other works. You can teach intolerance instead, or you can completely ignore the racism, because at this point racism is a far gone conclusion that racism is bad is the general consensus, we thought. So we don't have to talk about the racism in this classroom, because I believe when that paper was published, we had President Barack Obama, and we were super post-race. So, sweet. So, but I love having those two, at the very least, those two different, professors talking about how they teach this film and also with the other professor from the PWI, his classroom was more racially and diverse based on gender as well. So he would have, a couple people of color of different, races spread out throughout the courses, and how different people, depending on where they were coming from, would respond to the film. And for me, it's all been a part of like the research process. As someone who wants to join, these people that I admire so much, these academics in academia, hopefully as a professor one day, hopefully as Dr. Cydnii one day, how would I teach Birth of a Nation is a real question. It's a question that myself and so many of my friends from my department would talk about. And we all would say different things about how we would personally teach this film or talk about Griffith. So, and I also don't believe that, you should all teach it how I say it should be taught. Like, that's not the goal. But I do think that there is a case for teaching this film and not ignoring its racism because it's uncomfortable to talk about. I think we have to stand up in the fact that this film is racist and caused a lot of harm, and you need to know that moving forward, so that we don't just purely glorify this film. So that's the front half of the video essay, is historical context, bringing in two different points of view on how to teach this film, and then the second half of the video essay is basically, in so many words, I communicate, how, for some students in a film class, when you're being taught Birth of a Nation, you might not immediately pick up on how we get from Birth of a Nation to Emmett Till, or Birth of a Nation to Oscar Grant, or everything else, or from Birth of a Nation to redlining, or from Birth of a Nation to the prison industrial complex. You may not every student might immediately draw that through line. And I understand that, but for so many of our minority students, it's inherently there. And depending on how welcoming these classroom environments are, will really determine how much we decide to share or feel safe to share in a classroom setting. So the second half of the video essay is, this may not be the experience for all of your students, but this is the experience of a lot of your students every time you glorify this piece of work. And it then is a montage between different video essays talking about different techniques that Griffith is purported to have pioneered, followed directly by an act of violence that was committed in the name of that film, essentially. So it's, cross-cutting the Chicago riots, so-and-so, Tulsa, the Tulsa Massacre, the destruction of Black Wall Street, from all the way from 1915 until the present day, just so it's made very clear that the acts of violence that are being committed today are directly connected to the acts of violence that we've seen in the past, and are directly related to this work of propaganda that has been used against us to make these acts of violence okay for so long. And that's the difficult part, because watching news clip after news clip or video after video of an act of violence that has been committed against people who look like me is not fun. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. But because it's effectively a paper that I wrote now put into a visual medium, that's kind of where the length is coming from. So now I'm trying to figure out, well, how many clips should I have in the montage to get my point across? Right. But because of that, honestly, I'm really open to it growing in length in a way that I wasn't necessarily, in the spring of 2018 when I started. I think that's part of the fun of the video essay making process, is how it can start off as one thing and then grow into another, just by virtue of the artistic process itself.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that, and I totally understand and appreciate, why you're taking your time with it, for sure. and like definitely have to have you back on whenever it's finished to talk about it. And I'll just say, as one of your fans, I would watch like an hour-long version of that. I know that like you may not want to like make an hour-long version because that might take like forever, but I feel like I speak for most people when that. And also like I feel like you have an audience of people, you know, like it's not like I feel like there's a difference between someone who's just like comes out with a 1 hour thing and it's their first thing, you know, but you have like a body of work that ranges in time and scope. I feel like it's like, oh, Cydnii can make cotton and make a really powerful piece in 6 minutes or whatever, or you can do the long form. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents for what it's worth. Maybe it's not worth much, but
Thank you very much. It's worth so much. And also, I just want to briefly shout out Spike Lee really quick. So I part of the reason where maybe it has like fallen down the queue of like things that I'm working on is literally because I was in the theater watching BlacKkKlansman, and then I watched Spike Lee do that, like take him like literally. He has a montage in, I want to say like almost the middle point or the 3/4 mark of BlacKkKlansman, where it's Harry Belafonte reciting the story of a lynching while it's intercut with scenes of white nationalists at a Klan rally watching Birth of a Nation. He literally did the thing I wanted to do, so I was like, well, there it is. Don't have to now. Thanks, Spike.
Now let's transition to talking about your video essay, Cotton, the Fabric of Genocide, which I feel like it has a special place in my heart too. You know, like I feel like not only because I love it, but it's like it is the video essay podcast. Like, you know what I mean? Like we talked about it on that very first episode. So like, I feel like I watched it like several times because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to talk about a video essay with Katie Grant, and I need to like not sound like a complete idiot, you know? So I was like, I've seen your essay probably as many times as I've ever seen any video essay, you know? And so, okay, so my first question, not to like make it about me and the show, but like what was like going through your head when you found out that like we were going to like talk about it? Because like, just to give you some backstory, I literally just said to Katie, I was like, this is the format of the show that I want to do. I want to talk about someone else's work. Just let me know what you want. And she was like, I want to talk about this. And I was like, great. So like, and for me, I was kind of like, she was like, Cydnii's a student at Cinematic Culture. I was like, a student, like cool. But also like, wow, I was not expecting that. And then I watched it. I was like, oh shit. Okay. Now I get it. This is awesome. So like, what was going through your head?
Thank you so much for the sweet, sweet compliments. So I got an email from Dr. Tracy who said, hey, Catherine Grant's gonna talk about cotton on this podcast. I lost my mind. Because I've been like fangirling over everyone. Like before I got to SCAD, I knew who Dr. Tracy was because I'd been shown her work, you know, in a classroom setting. So I knew about Catherine Grant's work too before I was formally introduced to her in any capacity, right? So fangirling super hard is how I would describe how I reacted. Like inside, I couldn't tell Dr. Tracy that. But I think the first thing I did was like call my mom, be like, Mom, my work is going to be talked about by these film scholars I love and respect so much, Mom. And I was just incredibly humbled by the experience and incredibly encouraged by the experience. I knew that Catherine Grant had seen my work before. I also real quick just want to say this. I feel like, I'm not sure what your experience has been, but I have to imagine that it might be somewhat similar to mine in this regard, that the people who I have encountered who I hope are now like mentors to me in film studies have been so encouraging in helping to support my work, in the creation of my work, in sharing my work with other people, in, I don't know, shouting me out on a podcast or sharing their work with their colleagues who then put it on like year-end lists is invaluable to someone who has maybe at the time, I don't know, only created 1 or 2 video essays and knows that they enjoy the process but isn't quite sure if this is something they want to continue doing or if their work has value in an already like potentially bloated space, you know? I have felt nothing but encouraged by the people that I've encountered at my time at SCAD and also just in my budding, career as a film scholar. And also because at that point I had only shown my video essay in 2 classrooms, and I had like shared it with my friends and family. Family's very proud of my work, so that's super cool. But other than that, it's just something like I created. I showed it to some friends, and I, submitted it for a grade. So to hear the fact that it jumped across the pond and was seen by people all over the world was not something I ever imagined could happen, and then to hear it discussed in such an academic way, and to hear how people were responding to my work too, because I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I think so often it felt like kind of being like a fly on the wall, hearing two people discuss a piece of art in a museum. And that also gave, I think, for me inside more credibility to feel like an artist, to hear it discussed in such a way. And also the creation of the video essay podcast in and of itself, I think does so much for helping to share information and awareness about what the visual medium is and who the scholars are and what the work is that they're doing. It's just a really cool. It was a really cool experience to have. I shared it with everyone I knew. So thank you so much.
Aw, thanks. Well, you're too kind. And I only feel bad because that was before I got smart and figured out how to not just take the Zoom audio or whatever. So I feel like the audio quality in poor Katie's interview is not very good. So I wish I could have been there. But I mean, yeah, that's super kind. And to your point about the community, absolutely, most supportive, encouraging people ever. And that's why sometimes this podcast, it feels too easy and unfair. And that's why I did it, because I knew that there was this incredibly fertile, it's fertile soil from which to grow this, podcast. Everyone's so supportive and so interested in each other's work and everything. It was so easy. Only on, I think, maybe one other occasion that I can remember, but I could be wrong, have we had someone on the show whose work has been discussed, but we didn't go in deep to it. And that was Chloe Galibert-Linné. And I gave her the opportunity to just say to ask, did Katie and I, and it was a while ago, did we get anything wrong about your work? Do we need to correct the record here at all? I feel I need to give you, it's the journalist in me. It's I feel I need to get your side of the story.
I remember feeling yes, they got it. That was the general feeling when I first listened to it. And it was really cool to see how things that I was trying to communicate without voiceover necessarily, except for I think the words at the top of it. It was really cool to hear two people engage with the piece, and get it, and get that I'm purposefully using humor, and or at the very least, when I was making it, I feel that piece might be indicative of maybe who I am to a certain degree, or at the very least my tone of voice. Yeah. I think that it communicates my tone of voice pretty effectively. So I'm happy that, and I was always a little curious about how, the fact that my log line beneath it is, this is a video essay about racism. Oops, I mean cotton. I'm so happy that has been received as the moment of sarcasm is supposed to be, and that I think a lot of the video should also be, because that's the thing about it. Racism is absurd, and I want the piece to also read that way, to read into the absurdity of saying that the Civil War was about cotton, and we're agrarian and we're farmers who this isn't about people's lives. That's absurd. So I'm happy that was communicated to y'all effectively.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the questions I had for you, because, and maybe I'm repeating myself because I don't really remember what I exactly said in the pod last time. So I'll have to go back and re-listen too. Was it kind of balances this tone between being this video, the Zinnemann short film is fucking absurd. How can you not laugh at how absurd it is? But also it's deeply fucked up and problematic, and just every word you could throw at it. It's just horrendous. It's I can't believe something like that was made. And which mean obviously I can, but it's just it's just so I don't even, it's just so stupid, but also so fucked up. Like, it's crazy. And, you know, as you just said, like, I think that tone is so clearly communicated. But I'd be curious, like, how did you discover that film? And, like, when you saw it, were you just like, I have to do something with this? Because that, like, it's so crazy.
Great question, because that is exactly what happened. This is actually going back to the same melodrama class I mentioned earlier with Dr. Chad Newsom. He has a really cool collector's edition, like Blu-ray box set of Gone with the Wind that we were using to like actually watch Gone with the Wind and talk about it. It's a melodrama, so it was a part of the lesson plan. But he, I guess in the special features, it's a part of the DVD box set. So I assume that he came across it and said, this will be interesting to share, like it's directed by Fred Zinnemann. This will be interesting to share with the class about just the history of how Gone with the Wind was created, how it was marketed, and how a piece of film media was used to market an even bigger piece of film media that would be coming the next year. So he showed it in our classroom, and I just remember we were all, it was effectively like not played for laughs, but you know, it plays how it reads, which is absurd. And I just remember watching that for the first time on, you know, on a projection, on a screen projected up there, that and that actually might have been in a theater too, come to think of it. We might have been, you know, like watching Gone with the Wind. And also here's this companion piece to it. I just remember hearing the word cotton over and over again and thinking like, cotton, the fabric of our lives. Like, it just, am I allowed to say that? I'm not advocating or endorsing the cotton, the brand, but I couldn't separate the two. I couldn't hear cotton being talked about in such a politicized way, and not see all of the different cotton ads that like we have grown up seeing on television our entire lives, who are largely populated by white women, with the exception of Queen Latifah once, and Leona Lewis had a campaign with them in, like, I want to say 2007 or 8. But for the most part, it's like, because obviously like the optics of having an entire ad campaign based around cotton and featuring like African American performers maybe won't read great everywhere, given the history that we all understand cotton has. So that was my first experience viewing it, was like, oh, this is fascinating. And I also had for each class, my class with Dr. Newsom and my class with Dr. Tracy, I had 2 separate video essay assignments, and I had ideas for both of those assignments already, but when I saw this short film, I was immediately inspired, and I wondered if one of them would let me do something with it. So I ended up actually creating cotton for Dr. Tracy's class, even though I watched Zinnemann's film in Dr. Newsom's class. It was a fascinating process. It's a fascinating little film. And also just because the imagery related to cotton is so prevalent in a lot of the films that are made that also have Black people and characters in them, because so many films that happen to feature Black people or Black Americans also, for whatever reason, happen to take place during slavery, or happen to take place during sharecropping, or have flashbacks where we're in fields picking cotton. It's always cotton. So there was just this rich history of, and also on top of that, at the time I was writing a paper about, that would become my thesis, that was about Nate Parker's The Birth of a Nation from 2016, which is another film about enslaved African peoples and a revolt that took place. So I had all of this imagery around me, already, and then we happened to watch this short film, and it just kind of fit perfectly. And luckily, I was in a supportive creative environment, a supportive creative and academic environment that Dr. Cox-Stanton signed off on me using it. And it was I'm so happy that she did. So because I keep everything, because I'm a pack rat, I found my notes and like the original assignment, because I couldn't remember like what class did I create this for again. It was so long ago. What were the parameters? Because you guys asked those questions within the podcast, like what were her time constraints, how many pieces of media was she allowed to use, were there constraints, all that fun stuff. So So I can answer that for you. I remember when I turned it in, understanding that, like, I'm not really following a whole lot of these guidelines. I had to, like, get her to sign off on this. I didn't just say, here's a piece of media that we didn't even talk about in this class. Hope you like it. Like, I did have to... I also had a short paper to go along with to explain the video essay itself that was meant to be between 6 to 8 pages. Right? Yeah. No, 3 pages. I lied. 3 pages. But originally it says the video essay perform an audio-visual experiment, roughly 3 to 6 minutes, that responds to one of the following prompts. The epigraphic video essay, and then defines the instructional video, and the side-by-side. So that was the prompt that we were given. And originally, I think I wanted to talk about... so that video essay is in response to the opposition Days by Bell Hooks. So I... basically saw this piece of media and understood what it was trying to communicate, but I happened to have a completely different perspective, and that was the gaze that I was trying to portray with my video essay, right? But originally, it says here I wanted to talk about, again, really got to work on the penmanship. It says here I wanted to talk about The Matrix, Planet of the Apes, American Psycho. Like, I don't know where I was going originally, but I'm very happy that I arrived. Like, in a sort of series of serendipitous moments happened to arrive on the Zinnemann film. But, yeah, that's how Cotton was born. And it's like I saw this one piece of media and then immediately understood that there's a lot of representations of Cotton and also black people. And also just everything that it was saying about Cotton as well, and like why the Civil War was fought, and that depiction of Lincoln. And then when it gets all, I've had this question before about the part in the video essay where the film starts to melt. Yeah, that, wish I could take credit for it. That's not me. That's actually in the original. Yeah, that's in the original Zinnemann film. The Old South. It's called The Old South. It's from the Old South. Like, and seeing that happen visually on screen was also just a really interesting moment. I found the whole video like fascinating, even though I may have not agreed with like its politics, but I understood what it was trying to do. But yeah, no, that was Zinnemann. It just felt like it would. I wanted to do something specifically with those images too, because I thought that they were so visually appealing as well. And also, I think that you guys you do discuss this in the original podcast, so I'm sorry if I repeat you guys, but the Old South literally was made as promotion to Gone with the Wind before it came out, to get America excited about the Civil War, because at that point, I mean, Gone with the Wind was, a best-selling novel and everyone was excited, and of course, there was the excitement over who was going to play Rhett and who was going to play Scarlett O'Hara, and the nationwide global search for actresses, and why isn't it Bette Davis? Who is Vivian Leigh? We don't like it until we love her. So that was all. I guess allegedly America was not super excited about a Civil War epic, and this film was literally created to reinvigorate people and to get them excited again about this war that at the time maybe people weren't super excited about, or as excited about as they needed to be to get butts in seats. So as a commercial, it's a fascinating piece. But it also, I think, is like maybe the perfect companion to Gone with the Wind, because they both are attempting to serve the same purpose of potentially like not rewriting history so much as like rewriting history for the sake of the story that we're about to tell within it, for the sake of these characters. So if in Gone with the Wind we have Hattie McDaniel and Butterfly McQueen and playing enslaved peoples and being lost without Scarlett and not necessarily wanting to be free, or being like the stereotypical like happy slaves, right? And all to serve as a means of like serving a purpose of making Scarlett O'Hara feel not relatable, but attractive to an audience, basically. To make her our actual heroine and not like an anti-heroine, right? So in that way, while how you have like, you're purporting the myth of the happy slave stereotype, quote unquote happy slave myth, You have a piece of media that is purporting the myth that the Civil War was about states' rights and not about the states' rights to enslave people. You know, you have a film you have two films that are literally basically doing the same thing, that are attempting to rewrite history for financial gain. And it's once again that intersection between racism and capitalism that maybe even at the time I wasn't as conscious about. Even though I include those cotton commercials, I'm not sure how conscious I was in 2017 about, you know, what I was necessarily communicating about racism and capitalism.
As you say, like, you're working with that film, The Old South, is so, like, loaded as a media object. And so it makes total sense that you go back and kind of rediscover things in that and in your own work. One of the things, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this and if you agree, is I think sometimes I've watched video essays that get in the way of the material that they're working with, if that makes sense. And the sense that I get while watching your piece is that you're working with this culturally, racially loaded film, however you want to describe it, and you kind of adopt a minimalist aesthetic in the piece. Like, you don't need to over-explain, you don't need to add all these, like, weird graphics. The piece is brilliant, I think, in that it knows exactly what to show and not show, and to deliver maximum impact, which I think is embodied by the you'll be gone with the wind, and then it cuts. I'm wondering if that's something you thought about. You were deliberate in making the piece, in trying to just really let the images speak for themselves, because I think, to me, that is way easier said than done, adopting that aesthetic and having it be effective. And I think it's what makes the piece really that much more powerful and impactful.
Thank you. Definitely that was, I think initially what I wanted to do was to try to articulate my experience of watching The Old South for the first time with my own video essay. So because of course, like, I had to, write a paper that accompanied this, so I have somewhere, I can't find it, but I have somewhere articulated my thoughts in words. But I feel like I think that by jumping back and forth, by, like, using The Old South as, like, my base level piece from which I wanted to comment, like, use other pieces of media to comment on it, I wanted to create a very specific tone, like an almost playful, like, that's not what they are saying is not actually what is reality necessarily. Like, what is being narrated in this short film in The Old South is not necessarily something that we should take at face value. And I think that because I found it to be so absurd that I wanted to communicate that, like my sarcastic viewing of the original piece, I wanted to communicate that sarcasm through, like, where I would include clips and how I would use them, while also not trying to detract from the weight of the topics of, slavery and racism and all of the bad things that come along with them, with those institutions. I feel like some of the video essays that I have engaged with most have been ones that leave me feeling, like, invigorated, I guess. And that's kind of what I wanted to convey as well, especially because I think that's so much of what the dialogue is doing in the narration. The narration is trying to invigorate its audience into seeing Gone with the Wind next summer. And in that regard, I would say The Old South was effective. I was incredibly invigorated just to do the opposite. I honestly, I struggled to, like, think back to where exactly my head was when I was making it, just because it was, like, 3 years ago, and it was for a class project, and I remember being incredibly excited, but also, I think I just wanted it to be fun. As fun as a video about slavery and cotton as it can be. Right. But yeah, that's how it came to be.
Well, unless you have anything else you want to say about the video essay, I think it could be a good time to transition to kind of talking about the two video essays that you selected for us to talk about. Does that sound good to you?
Yes, I'm super excited.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd love if you introduce them. Perhaps we could start, or you can pick which one we'll start with, and then we'll talk about that one, and then maybe you can introduce the second one, and then we'll end there.
The first video essay that I would like to discuss is Slap That Bass Zoomed by Ian Garwood. I absolutely loved this piece and what it was doing. I think the first thing that really resonated with me about it was, one, its use of format, its and also its use of editing. I love his editing techniques here because it's incredibly tight. It is so well edited. So, to Slap That Bass Zoomed in, quote, "Shall we dance? Fred Astaire performs a virtuoso dance in a ship's engine room in front of an impressed group of African-American workers. The video takes Astaire out of the picture, replacing him with an array of performers who were denied the Hollywood spotlight." And right off the bat, fascinating concept. Love what you're doing, Ian. But it's also taking place, the video situates itself like it's taking place within a Zoom meeting. So like Fred Astaire is one character within the Zoom meeting, and Bill Robinson's another, and whoever is on screen at the time like takes over control of that Zoom call, you know? And I loved the use of making it look like a Zoom call, because I think we're all like far too familiar with Zoom at this point. It's very it resonates very well right now. But also all of the different Black performers that he highlighted, some of whom were new to me, some of whom that, you know, there are only photos of and not videos of, just because of the times that either, you know, footage was either never created or lost to time, because that's just what happens within a racist structure. So I found it. And again, I cannot overstate this. His editing is so incredibly tight. I absolutely love this video essay, and the first time I saw it, I've shared it with friends who, you know, aren't necessarily, you know, film scholars, but just because I thought it was a cool piece of media. So that was the first one I shared. What did you think?
Yeah, no, totally agree. I love the concept of Zoom because it made, not only did it kind of speak to like obviously the current moment or whatever, but it was a cool way to make the piece feel more like cohesive. Like it almost felt, because the whole concept is like all of these performers are like almost, you know, the song is playing and then like it's showing images of them. So it almost feels like more collaborative in that sense, even though these videos and images are being drawn from all of these different places. So I thought that was really clever. And also the Zoom format also allows Ian to like include the names of the performers there in a way that's like very visible and clear. So it's not like they're all in the credits at the end and you have to go through. So it's really makes it clear that it's trying to, you know, highlight performers who you may not know. And like there's a wide range of people from, you know, I think like Ella Fitzgerald is there, who's someone who we would, you know, most people would probably, you know, to, as you say, performers who, you know, there aren't even videos of or something like that. So I thought that was, you know, just on a formal level, that really worked and was really effective. It
felt like incredibly encompassing and engrossing, and I absolutely loved what he did with the medium. I absolutely loved it. He also like mutes Fred Astaire and then like brings in Ella Fitzgerald singing the song "Slap That Bass" instead of like Fred Astaire's version. I just felt it was all beautifully executed, so it was really cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, like this concept of zoomed, like it's almost like a videographic exercise in its own way. Like I want to zoom something else. And also the song is like zoom, zoom, zoom. Like it's a lyric in the song. So it's kind of like it's like a play on words. And I think one of the other things that I really appreciated about the piece is that by using still images, it became, I don't know what the correct way to say this is, but by using the still images, it became clear like the values of the piece, which was less about like trying to find the perfect moving image or something, which may be something we hyper focus on as video essayists. Like we want everything to really flow, instead of saying, like, okay, I'm going to focus on like really highlighting these people, even if I can't find a moving image, but how can I still find a way to make it work, like, and still flow? And like that is really captured in this video essay. Like, even when it was just like a still image, I didn't feel taken out of the piece. It didn't like diminish it for me in any way. And so I thought that was really interesting, and kind of going forward thinking about like, okay, if I can't find the perfect moving image, that doesn't mean that I abandon the idea. It's like, okay, now that's maybe sometimes it does, but it can also mean that, okay, that's me as a video essayist. Like, I have to get creative and figure out a way to incorporate that, you know?
Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, it's such an incredibly deft choice, because on the one hand, it's communicating this history of like erasing Black performers from certain spaces just by virtue of, you know, them maybe not being recorded in the first place, or that footage not being valued enough to be, you know, retained and restored into the present day. So for me, some of the most effective moments were when still images were used, and how that made me think about, wow, we don't even have video of this performer. Like, you know, the function that using still images actually served, one of the functions that the still images served, I found just a really incredible choice.
Well, one thing I was thinking, just to go off that, was like, now I almost feel like there's like a call to action in the piece, to where it's like, all right, now I've introduced you briefly to these performers. Now you need to go seek them out. You know what I mean? Like, so now it's like, you don't really have a reason to pretend you don't know who these people are, because I've just given you their names, and now you can go look for their filmography, look for their performances, find the original videos where the clips are taken from, because I believe Ian links to all of them in the description below, which I like love, and I definitely want to start like doing that if I do something like this, because I think it makes it really accessible. So that's like another really cool element, I thought, where I was like, okay, this video, it doesn't feel like it's some type of piece of criticism where it's just like self-contained and is what it is. It feels like, okay, here's like a starting place for you to like go discover new things.
Yeah, exactly. I love that everything is linked, and that's exactly, like, I wonder if that was his intention, and I have to assume at least partly it was, because that is exactly how I felt in watching. It was like, I cannot wait to Google every single one of these people, and look, I mean, I'm still going to, because I want to know who they are, and I want to see all of their work, but here's this handy Google Doc with all of the clips from this video. It's just a fascinating piece, and how it's communicating with its audience. It really is like a call to action.
Right. Like, that's what I love about video essays, or like, and I guess this should be like all kind of writing or scholarship or whatever, but I feel like video essays in particular, they can be their own like self-contained piece for you to like enjoy and watch, but then also give you this way to like continue to discover, which I love.
And also, like, to that point, you know, about what is a video essay, or maybe, I don't know, what's a music video? Can something be both at the same time? This is using a piece of music and using its images and its music to communicate a very clear message. But it also it's edited like a music video. It's edited to the beats within the song, which I think makes it that much more poignant. So it for me kind of sometimes even reads like a music video for Ella Fitzgerald's version of Slap That Bass, which is so cool. And what are musical theater numbers in musicals, if not like incredible music videos? You know, so the way that it's like how it takes place in a factory, and it's showcasing, like, of course, like the labor of the people working in the factory, but also like the labor of the performers themselves, and the fact that it's all on Zoom, which is where a lot of us are now working. The chef's kiss. Loved every aspect of the ideology of work, you know?
For sure. Totally agree. And yeah, Ian's stuff is great. And he actually, I'll give him a quick plug. He just published a must-read article in Nexus about his indie vinyl project, and is kind of how he sees it as an audiovisual book. So definitely go read that. I'm really a big fan of Ian's stuff. Got to get Ian on the podcast for sure. And then I can put him in the same position I put you, where I'm like, what did me and Cydnii get wrong? What did we get right? What was that like? So, but you had another video essay that I really, really enjoyed, and that was, or I'll let you introduce it for the listeners.
My next video essay is New Forms of Racism in the Post-Cinematic Dispositif by Jace Alexander Casey. This video came out like 3 years ago, but I have just now seen it for the first time. Like, I'm discovering it, so I'm talking about it. But no, I absolutely... I loved this piece so much. The description here reads, new technology, same old racism. The practices and forces that constitute post-cinema are enabling new ways of visualizing race and racism. The new racist logic of the digital age is to exploit and erase actors of color while simultaneously asserting a post-racial utopia. Content covered includes CGI characters, constructions, performance capture, and color grading. And my goodness, is this video essay so cool.
So cool.
So cool. I love the use of the voiceover work, and the decision to use a robot's voice to narrate it, and that it's dealing with technology and like erasing identity through technology, and all of the different characters that he brings in, and the history, the long-sitting history of of blackface in media, and how that has how are black characters being repositioned in new media today or being erased today, the erasure of black characters in new media, and what that says about the universe where these worlds take place. It's just fascinating. I'm not the first person to say it, but it's so cool. So incredible.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, an example of it's not long at all, but so good. There's not a wasted second in it. It's so concise. And one thing I did was I'm obsessed with these video essays that use terminology in a way that's still accessible to a layman, which I guess is what all good criticism must do, but that a lot of academic writing doesn't. And obviously that's one of the good features of the video essay. But I felt this video essay didn't even really dive into what post-cinema was, but made it so clear what it was. I feel like I could show that to someone who had never before even taken a film class or heard the term, and what post-cinema is and its implications in this way. By looking at the implications of post-cinema, it made it clear what post-cinema is, if that makes sense. And maybe that's an obvious point, but I feel like that's worth noting. I don't know. What do you think?
It's completely worth noting because that is not an easy concept to succinctly explain.
Right.
This video essay does so, right from the top, and does so well, is remarkable. Because these are not necessarily easy concepts. It's so well written. I think and also I love how every second, every frame that is used is used so effectively, like you said. I completely agree. But every visual and audio choice that Casey has chosen just fits the overall thesis of the piece so well. Everything fits together into this beautiful mosaic that is so convincing of its point.
Right. And I think there's this tendency in video essay that I think maybe is born out of the supercut genre, where I feel like we feel a need to pack in every example we can think of. That's something that I always encounter. If you go to a public screening of video essay, someone will raise their hand and be like, well, did you think of this film to include or whatever? And I felt like this video was a perfect example that you don't need a ton of examples to really effectively make your point, because I think there's only maybe 3-4 films that are at the center. So 4, and you could think of 100 more. You could think of a ton more, but you don't need, if you make the most of the examples that you choose and just make it so clear, which is way easier said than done, then that's all you need, and you just need a 4 or 5 minute video.
It does so effectively. Again, sometimes I watch video essays and really I just am in awe of what I'm seeing, and also I see a piece and I'm that is the type of work that I want to create.
Right.
And that's how I feel about both pieces, actually. It's that's how you video essay right there. That's how you do it. It's the order in which the clips are used. I don't know, it just felt like everything was timed so perfectly. It's it feels I'm not sure if this was a paper first, a written paper first, but it feels like it may have been, with images put to illustrate these points that have been so clearly articulated. It's incredibly well done.
Yeah, me too. And I think the voiceover was done that's automated, I think. Is that what?
I assume that it was one of those programs where you type in your words and it reads it back automatically. I assume it was automated as well.
Right. Or there was some effect added to it to make it feel more automated. Yeah. And I don't know what that there's a range of reasons why that might have been the case for why that was used, so I don't want to like impute a reason for that. But I felt like that choice, just on an aesthetic level, really contributed to the piece. Like I thought the voiceover was really strong, both from that aesthetic standpoint and also like how concise it was in like, again, like that element was not only was the piece visually concise, but that was like, I felt like there wasn't a wasted word. Like everything was super clearly written, tight. And so the voiceover that way was really strong. And then you kind of have this component to it that makes it feel a little more automated, which I think contributed, like, obviously to the discussion of post-cinema.
Yeah. And also, of course, just the choice to have narration and be talking about technology and racism and how they intersect in these specific films, and then to almost completely remove the identity of the narrator by giving it an automated voice is just such a beautiful choice. It's
right.
just it like has a motif and it sticks to it so well. I just thought that was such a brilliant choice. It's not using an automated voice for the sake of. It's using an automated voice deliberately because it adheres to the subject that we're talking about, and that is such a brilliant decision.
Right. And I think, it really, it's also a video about spectatorship, I think, on a level, because it's like, just because these are like, the big Hollywood blockbuster stuff, like these are the Gone with the Winds on a level like of our time. And so like, in Gone with the Wind, the issues of race they're self-evident, but just because it's not a movie about the Civil War doesn't mean that you can't approach, that you can just forget and not approach those films through that same critical lens. Like these are the Gone with the Winds of today, and as far as, commercially and production and the spectacle. Completely.
And even with like all the films that he chose from the Star Wars film, space westerns, which are, the Western has its own racial ideology encoded throughout, throughout its genre. And then you have Avatar, which is that also a space western?
Like, I guess kind of. Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I think so.
Kind of. It's like another space western, but again, comes with all of its own ideology wrapped in it from like about colonization, Right. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. There's like a Manifest Destiny type vibe to it, kind of like. Totally. But the fact that these are the films in which you are seeing the erasure of people of color take place is not lost on this video essayist. And then, of course, Beauty and the Beast is a folk tale originally. So, and that was something, that I think we're all just happy to have Audra McDonald in anything, but, it's the same issue that we find with Disney's Princess and the Frog, and how we're all very excited to have our first Black Disney princess, but then she is a frog for like 70% of that film. So there isn't a great representation of her actual Black woman body on screen. It's her as a frog, which is like a long-standing tradition. It was just a beautifully crafted piece, and I would wonder if in other films where this takes place, is there that similar through line of like, well, there is a racial history to this genre to begin with. I'm trying to think of other examples of other films where that takes place, like Princess and the Frog, but that one again is taken from folklore, like adapted from folklore. So the generic conventions there are inherently pretty. There's some racist ideology swimming through some of those as well. So yeah, I love a video essay that can lead to this sort of discussion, honestly.
Yeah, and discussion's what we're all about. And I think on that note, Cydnii, thank you so much for this discussion today. I feel like this is so great to finally get to meet you and to do it in this format. And hopefully, our paths will cross as we head into academia and hopefully get out of COVID. So really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been like one of the coolest things I've done so far during all of this, during the apocalypse. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for shining a light on my work in your first episode of the podcast. Honestly, like, the amount of like support and love and that I felt just from my work being shared on here has been indelible. So I'm really grateful. And I'm also just super happy to have finally gotten to talk to you in real life.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much. That was like definitely one of the goals of the podcast, is to like hopefully make people feel that way. So that warms my heart. So thank you.
Oh, before we sign off, I did want to say, you guys mentioned you address me directly in the podcast, you and Katie, when you say, Cydnii, if you're listening, you keep making more videos like this, and call to actions work, because I felt so encouraged by that, of like, wow, cool, I really should get back to it. They like me. They really like me. So thank you so much.
Oh, I forgot that we did that, but it's true. Yeah. And I'm glad that between that and the exercises that you found them helpful. And, talking about your work's like all my pleasure. So like without like great work, the show doesn't exist. So it's a circle. It's a circle. So thank you. And look forward to having you on again in the future, and probably the near future, when we do an episode on the Black Lives Matter playlist. So that'll be super fun.
To reconstruct with their cotton a glorious nation which had gone with the wind.